What is woke? It's a word that's been around for a good, millennia. No, not that long. It's one thing to be awake, right? Or that you were awakened, or that you were woken up. These are of course some words that we're familiar with. But in the context of political debates, what is woke? And we're going to hear a lot more about this because of some national political figures that are touring to essentially share their ideas about how, to put together policies they believe is going to be best for society. And we see this ongoing kind of, in a way, trendy set of issues that are getting more and more intense in some people's estimations, and what is being considered to be a woke culture. So this is obviously something we're going to hear a lot more about. But what is woke? And if you go to Webster's dictionary, you'll see that they've got an explanation here. Woke, also woker or wokist. It says that it's aware of and actively attentive to important societal facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. It goes on to give some examples of all of that, also reflecting the attitudes of woke people. Politically liberal, another definition there, as in matters of racial and social justice, especially in a way that is considered unreasonable or extreme. So there you can see it being kind of considered a pejorative. So that's at least what Webster's dictionary has as the meaning of woke. So it can either be somebody who has a certain understanding about how they think society is built and what needs to change about society, and then you have it being used as a pejorative, as being too liberal, according to Webster's. So we'll hear some of the national figures and the state figures that are using these terms and what's really behind some of that. But of course, I want to get your thoughts at 217-629-7970. Good morning, you're on WMAY.
Woke is an attempt by the radical left to use the accusation of like racism or you're anti-feminist or whatever. You're ever whatever the minorities think they are.
Well, I think, though, that even some of the traditional feminists are being criticized by some in political circles for being what is called TERFs, and that's trans exclusion radical feminist, I think, is what TERF stands for. So, J.K. Rowling, for instance, the author of Harry Potter, doesn't want people born men to compete in women's sports, so she's called a TERF, and that's coming from what people that you might be lumping them into are considered woke. So we're getting a lot of these pejoratives out there. That's for sure.
It's a cudgel to shut down any kind of talk between people. They use that. They bring up woke, and they use that as an attempt to shut down your argument.
Yeah, cudgel, I think, is an interesting word, and obviously one that it brings about an idea of being hit with something, and even if it is being called a TERF or being labeled racist or those types of kind of ad hominem attacks, that doesn't really get to the substance of certain arguments. But with woke, you're going to hear a lot about this. Ron DeSantis was in Illinois, in Elmhurst on Monday. This is some of what he had to say when he was talking about policies. He says, too often, put a certain political idea ahead of common sense or public safety. Here is Ron DeSantis from earlier this week.
And you also see battles over things like critical theory. They want to inject a very significant, I think, pernicious ideology in the schools, in the different subject matter. And we've said basically things like critical race theory are not appropriate for K through 12 schools, and so we don't allow that to be injected in. And a lot of people see some of the stuff you probably read about, and some of it is just really outrageous. What a lot of people don't realize is one of the things that flows from critical theory, and you've seen it in some of these cities, is teaching kids to have a hatred for law enforcement. They actually have things where they will say that law enforcement are gunning down racial minorities with impunity, without any evidence. And that's just a slander on the people that wear the uniform. So the goal of critical theory with respect to police is to basically sow a hatred amongst very young people for those who are wearing the uniform. And in Florida, we reject that. That is totally inappropriate and that is wrong. But what we also do, in addition to say that shouldn't be taught like that or taught in schools, is we actually have programs now where school districts can work with local law enforcement agencies to let students go and observe and be a part of what's going on at our police departments and our sheriff's departments. Why is that important? Well, the kids go and they're going to see a lot of people who are conscientious. They're going to see a lot of people that are public spirited. They're going to see a lot of people who are trying to keep their community safe. And they're going to develop an appreciation for the hard work that people do, and they will develop a proper respect for what the people of law enforcement do. So we're totally different in Florida than what you see in all these other things. So woke education doesn't work. Woke indoctrination about law enforcement doesn't work, and we're happy to be leading the charge on that in the state of Florida. But if you look at all these different things that these states and these localities are doing, it all goes back to putting ideology ahead of what's right for you. And that needs to stop in this country. We got to start doing what's right for people.
So again, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, visiting Illinois, talking to law enforcement and raising the issues he sees as being, quote, woke. Governor J.B. Pritzker responding earlier this week after Ron DeSantis made that visit. And here's some of what the governor had to say, even saying he doesn't know what woke means.
What was that last question? Should we send what for?
Comments on his speech, and should the state increase incentives for local police departments to help recruit more officers?
Yeah, so let's see. I'll start with I didn't watch the speech. I read reviews of it or reports of it, and I can just say that the things that I read anyway are not things that they're not the values that most people in Illinois share. You know, what he's done in Florida is to try to have the government intervene to a large degree in the quality of the education or the type of education that people are getting, and that will lower it. I think teachers are worthy of investing in, and by the way, we shouldn't be banning books from our libraries. Teachers shouldn't be forced to, toss books away or put them in a drawer. And the truth is that we actually have a much better education system in Illinois than they have in Florida. We're ranked higher than they are. U.S. News and World Report ranks K-12 education in Illinois 6th in the country and number 1 among the largest states in the country. So he's got nothing to brag about when it comes to education. So he moves on and tries to use this word woke to describe everything. He doesn't even know what the word means, and he has no definition of it. It's just anything he doesn't like is wokeism. And all I can tell you is that I don't know what that means. And frankly, what I can say about Illinois is that we're a state that cares about equity. We're a state that cares about our families. We're making the investments that are required so that our youngest children will do better and better. And I'm really excited about the direction of our state, as opposed to a state where they don't make the investments that are necessary to lift up their education system or their healthcare system.
All right, so that's Governor J.B. Pritzker. And we heard some of that yesterday as well, but wanted to reiterate that, especially in the context of talking about what woke is, because you're going to hear a lot more about this. And he talks about, teachers not wanting to be forced to, remove certain books. I would imagine, force goes both ways, right? Telling somebody not to do something, but also telling somebody to do something. And we've heard a lot of pushback from parents and teachers about, forced sex ed standards or forced culturally responsive teaching standards they may not agree with. But also the issue of equity. We'll hear about the education system and the concerns some Republicans at the State House have coming up next here. But of course, we want to get your phone calls real brief. We'll get to all of them. The full phone lines. Holy cow, we'll probably have to extend this all the way throughout the rest of this hour if this is the kind of response we're going to get with full phone lines. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning, Greg. I've got the word for you. Sums up the Democrat Party perfectly. That's blatherskit. And if you don't know what that means, it's basically political nonsense.
Blatherskit. I am going to have to look that up. Hopefully I did not just swear. Is that like
No,
German
you
or
didn't,
something?
Greg.
Or?
I would not steer you wrong, Greg.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. We'll see what others have to say. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Man, he's got a lot of nerve to sit up there and cite the only source that said the educational system in Illinois is succeeding, and then try to talk down on Florida that is doing way better than Illinois.
Well, and that's something the governor here in Illinois says, is that we're sixth in the country for education. But if you look at the outcomes, and this is something Republicans yesterday at the State House were pointing out, we're not doing great in Illinois. There's 30 some odd percent that can read at grade level, and about the same for who can do math at grade level. So is that really a testament to how well education is doing in Illinois versus other states? Yeah, I guess you can pick whatever study you want to pick to highlight the outcomes, right?
Well, he's going to stand up there and brag about it, and he's going to throw money at it, and it's not going to work. I mean, he's literally been taking money from us for the last, 4 years. Nothing he's done's worked. But then he wants to talk about Ron DeSantis, whose state's thriving. And then, it's just mind-boggling, man.
Yeah, Illinois has an increased population decline. School outcomes have actually gotten worse. COVID likely had a lot to do with that, and the governor shutting down schools in Illinois. The state's unemployment rate is higher than the national average. Florida's is lower than the national average. I mean, there's a whole host of things. Good morning, you're on WMAY. You would have been. Let's go to this one before the break. Good morning, you're on WMAY.
Perfect example of PC principle.
Oh my gosh. Bro, listen, all right? There's something about South Park. The cartoon South Park, if you have not seen South Park, they are the type of libertarians that sit on the fence and throw stuff at both sides constantly. And they have a character named PC Principal, politically correct principal. And he's just, I can't even describe, you have to go and watch the show to actually get it. It's incredible. I appreciate that laugh this morning. All right, we'll take a break, come back, hear some more about this, take more of your calls. It is Springfield's Morning News on WMAY. I'm Greg Bishop. Be sure to follow along, Bishop on Air. Gmail is how you can get a hold of me. Twitter, Bishop on Air. Facebook, Bishop on Air. YouTube, Bishop on Air. Everywhere, Bishop on Air. Blatherskit. Never heard the word before, but I know it now. It's a person who blathers a lot. I've heard of blather. Didn't realize blatherskit was a word. But yeah, nonsense, blather. We learn something new every morning here with Springfield's Morning News. I've been talking about what's considered woke. Got a lot of your phone calls. We'll get more of them, I promise. But let's hear from Republican State Representative Blaine Wilhauer. He talked about the state's education system in response to more spending that the governor's touring the state talking about. And the Republican from Beecher City, Blaine Wilhauer, he talked about equity and this idea of equity, what exactly it is. And that's something that the governor leaned into in his reaction to Ron DeSantis. Here again is Blaine Wilhauer.
I think that would be a lot better for our students. We've got a religious-like focus on equity when we talk about this stuff. I think that we could focus a little bit less on the equity and start focusing, really lift all the people up. We need to get away from the conversation. We've got a religious-like focus on equity when we talk about this stuff. I think that we could focus a little bit less on the equity and start focusing a lot more on excellence. I think that would be a lot better for our students. A lot of times equity is pursued at the expense of opportunity. We see that all over the states. Bad adversarial policy is removing the ability to gain equity in a lot of our communities. So I think we need to reset the conversation on that. But the bottom line is we are spending record amount of dollars on education, more than any states around us. Since the evidence-based funding formula has been put into effect in 2017, our proficiency numbers have actually gone down. We need to acknowledge the systemic shortcomings, and we need to change the way that we think about education, and we do education in this state. We need to move more towards a model of students and parents first. that gives them some options, especially in areas that are failing. There is no way that we are not doing a terrible thing by keeping students in schools across this state, that too many of them are systemically failing them. So let's.
So again, Blaine Wilhauer talking about the money that's been put into public education, how he says there's too much focus on equity and not enough on outcomes and achievement, and the Republicans pushing for more school choice, they say, is a way to hold schools accountable. But before we get to the bottom of the hour news here, I also wanted to share with you what State Representative Adam Niemerg had to say about being asked specifically, what is the idea of woke and what is an example of CRT, or as other people call it, critical race theory. Here's State Representative Adam Niemerg yesterday.
The culture responsive teaching, when you teach a child that their parents are inherently racist or they're inherently prejudiced, and you hear of what's happening in our public education system, that's CRT. That's culture responsive teaching standards. You can package it however you want to package it. And the parents know what's going on in these schools. And if they don't, they're starting to be made aware of what's going on in schools. And we see news story after news story after news story. So when you sit back and say, okay, give me a specific example of CRT, it's throughout. It is throughout our school system, our public education system, and what I just mentioned in the sex ed, in the gender bathroom bill that's coming through, culture responsive teaching standards. It doesn't matter how you package it. This wokeification of our schools is happening right before our very eyes.
We'll actually talk a little bit about this public bathroom bill that looks to make genderless bathrooms. That's something that Representative Niemerg addressed there. But he's asked more for specifics, in particular about Black History Month. And is that considered CRT, for instance? Here's Representative Niemerg.
When you talk about a particular child being told that their ancestors were the reason that this country is in the state of it that it's in, when you talk about privilege walks, when you talk about our children being told that your parents are inherently racist, and let's have a conversation about why that is. That's culture responsive teaching standards. That's critical race theory. When I was in college in the early 2000s, there were many professors that liked to be revisionist historians. They would talk about how they were more ideologically prepared for modern day America, and how the professors of the past didn't quite understand our history, and they wanted to fundamentally change it as it was founded. So, when you look at revisionist history, when you look at the rewriting of the history books, that's kind of what we're talking about with critical race theory and CRT. And we've seen it multiple times throughout the state of Illinois.
So again, Representative Adam Niemerg there talking a little bit more about his concerns of what he calls woke ideology. We heard the governor earlier talk about equity, and these are some of the things you're going to be hearing more and more about in the overall national political conversation. But more from what happened at the Illinois Statehouse. Again, you can always follow along with me, Bishop on Air, on Twitter. Really, I think that's a good place to go and get live updates as they happen throughout the day, outside of listening live and local here on WMAY 6 to 9 weekday mornings. But coming up, we'll talk about a bill that happened at the State House yesterday out of committee that deals with public bathrooms and genderless bathrooms, multi-stall genderless bathrooms. So stay tuned. We'll get to that. Well, we've been talking about the issue of woke politics. I'm not sure. Is it culture? Is it the cultural discussions that we're having here? Where would you put this? Is it just pure politics? But ultimately, you're going to be hearing a lot more about this term called woke. And if you haven't already been inundated with questions about critical race theory, what is it? Culturally responsive teachers, certain types of national sex ed standards, seems to be a lot to deal with education all around this, but even elsewhere. For instance, what kind of diversity do you have on your corporate board? There's even conversations apparently about making sure that there's reports on how diverse your not-for-profit board is, and these ideas focusing more on the term called equity. than maybe on focusing on outcomes or advancing people based on merit rather than if they're part of a certain class that a political group points at and says they have to have special privileges based off of external characteristics. So you've got these debates that are happening, and it's very much a national debate, and we've been getting your thoughts about that. But I do want to get to something that happened at the Illinois Statehouse yesterday, in particular when it comes to bathrooms and multi-stall gender-neutral bathrooms. But first, a phone call. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Oh, hi, Greggy.
Hey.
Okay. Could I go back to one point on a prior discussion, which is the big problem with Illinois education, I think, is unions. And the most significant tell was in a Journal Register when the local education union requested of the board that they not release the achievement test results, and when they were released, the parochial schools just destroyed the public schools because basically they just focused on the basics of education, and money's not the answer. They have a lot less money and resources, but they do a much better job.
Well, and one of the things the Republicans are pushing against, I appreciate the call, when it comes to increased costs for education, is the bureaucracy involved. We've got 852 school districts across the state, and the proficiency, it's not really there across the board. There are some schools that are doing great, not getting a whole bunch of money, public schools that are doing great, not getting a whole bunch of money, but then they have to follow all these unfunded mandates, like culturally responsive teaching standards or like new sex ed standards that might be coming down the pike to mandate that, or different types of what things people might consider as, equity or culturally woke policies, those types of things. But let's shift from schools to public bathrooms. Right now, it's already law that you, if you have a single stall bathroom, it has to be gender neutral. Kind of makes sense, right? You go to a gas station, there's only one restroom, it's a single stall. Well, you can just go ahead and go in there if you're a guy or if you're a girl. But now there's legislation to allow for multi-stall bathrooms to become gender neutral. Here is a brief conversation at the Illinois Statehouse about a bill. It's State Representative Katie Stewart. She's a Democrat from Edwardsville. Suzanne Ness, a Democrat from Crystal Lake, and Charlie Meyer, a Republican from Highland. They have this conversation at the Statehouse about gender neutral multi-stall bathrooms.
Creates the opportunity for places, businesses, universities, you name it, to create a multi-stall gender-neutral restroom if they so choose. And it lays out requirements for what is in that facility, locking mechanisms, privacy, disposal for menstrual products, all those types of things that we need to have in restrooms.
My question, this is not any kind of a mandate. This is just guidelines for facilities or establishments that want to create an all-gender restroom.
Right. So frequently if they would want to create it, they cannot. So this is completely permissive and just explains how to go about putting it in place, making sure that we're not we have the law about balancing, facilities, so making sure that we're not impeding on that, equality that we worked for a while back, and things like that.
So for places that already do have that, they're doing it illegally?
They're doing it illegally,
Really?
Yes.
Oh, I did not know that. Okay, thanks.
Now just to clarify, a few years back, we did pass a law that a single toilet facility, those are all non-gendered, and they should be across the board in the state of Illinois. This is to allow for a multi-stall if they so desire.
In here, part of it says requires certain newly constructed.
If you are newly constructing or renovating and you choose to make a gender-neutral facility, you can't, the idea is you can't have a gender-neutral facility and then a men's-only facility right next door. So if you want to create, for some reason, two separate multi-stall locations right next to each other or across the hall from each other, then they both would be gender-neutral. But that's just to avoid that problem, and that helps, again, balance what we require in terms of even numbers of facilities that are specifically gendered.
I'm looking at, think of large arenas where you've got people stacked high and low. You only have so much space. A lot of people will not want to go into an all-gender restroom, and you won't have no space. When buildings are plumbed, your plumbing is ran through certain areas that are heated and they're air conditioned so they don't freeze, and other parts of these big outdoor arenas aren't. And so you're adding a lot of cost into that.
If an arena is worried about the space, they do not have to create such a restroom. That's why it's permissive, and it's because we understand types of constraints like that.
Okay.
So again, just some of the types of bills they're discussing at the Illinois Statehouse, and we'll see if there are other bills that might fit into this category of some discussions of what's woke and what's not woke, or equity, or wherever these things ultimately land on the political spectrum. Trying to give you the broad array of different political conversations that are had. But I always encourage you to call in and sound off at 217-629-7970 on WMA.